PhD. I'm very happy to be here. I'm glad this many of you decided to brave the non-AC room to hear this talk. Or maybe you just didn't know that before you showed up here. Happy to see you guys. Hopefully we'll have a nuanced discussion of bioweapons and why they might be kind of pretty bad, guys.
Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about the history of bioweapons. Seems like the appropriate place to start. Okay, so I've got an exercise. Take your mind back. Imagine that it is the year 1348. A crisp spring breeze carries the smell of grass and salt water. You're a blacksmith that exports your wares to Europe via a port on one side of the city, kind of where Crimea is now. Now, the other side of the city is heavily fortified behind two sets of walls. The city is ending a year of being under siege by the Golden Horde led by Genghis Khan. Now, you're kind of used to the sound of trebuchets throwing rocks at you and your city every single day, but as you look up, you notice something different. The sound of crashing has been replaced. Instead of stone against stone, you hear just the thwack and nothing else. You look up into the sky, and instead of seeing a stone, you see something new. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's a plague-infested corpse thrown by the Golden Horde at you. It is very quickly followed by hundreds more bodies until you're literally knee-deep in the dead. Now, the stench is overwhelming. You have still been trading with the rest of Europe via the port. So you and all of the other citizens start grabbing these plague-infested bodies, or what's left of them, and dragging them into the sea. So dealing with dead bodies was a really serious and present and constant issue around this time. And you're dragging them in there. Unbeknownst to you, though, you've just been infected with the Black Plague. You don't know this, but there was cuts on your hands, as was kind of everyone else who was moving this, and you decide to basically abandon the city and you flee Kaffa via the boats that you used to trade. When you did this, you unwittingly brought the Black Plague to Europe. As a result of the trebuchets that attacked on this day, 25 million people died. And it was the first technology-inspired bioweapon attack to date. There had been a few people poisoning wells and stuff like that, but no one actually using technology to drive this. It's also probably the most deadly bioweapon attack in history. Was Genghis Khan the original Black Hat biohacker? I think he was. Here's a little graph I made of what a Black Hat biohacker is. So I think hackers use technology offensively. They use innovative strategies to solve intractable problems. They have a tinkering kind of approach. So, what am I going to do with all these dead bodies? Hurl them over a wall. And they use tech for personal gain. The only thing he didn't do was operate from first principles, because he thought that the plague was like a curse from God or something like this. It was divine. And it wasn't until much later that changed. Now, I'm just going to quickly cover what is a bioweapon. So you have a think in your head, like, what's a bioweapon? What makes it a bioweapon? Is this a bioweapon? Not. What do you guys reckon? This is a panel.
If you throw it hard enough.
So, technically, by the current definitions, everyone's got elements of truth to it. If it has fleas, not quite a bioweapon, but if those fleas carry the plague, it's a bioweapon. So it basically is a virus, a bacteria, or a toxic compound used as a weapon. So, there's anthrax all through the environment, but it's not a bioweapon until it's packaged up for someone to use as a weapon. Okay, these are some common vectors that we might use to deliver these bioweapons. So we've replaced trebuchets with envelopes, blankets infested with smallpox, and all sorts of stuff. And this slide is actually is really important. Technology has always been used to deliver bioweapons, but we focus a lot on restricting labs and things like that. But hackers are probably going to innovate here. This is the easiest place to innovate. Okay, so basically, there was a whole heap of medieval stuff. I can't go through all of it. There was some great stuff that I missed out of the talk. But basically, Louis Pasteur in 1815 to 1880 came up with the germ theory of disease, and this enabled us to start selecting microorganisms and making very targeted attacks, and it marked a transition for us using them as very precise, targeted weapons. I'm just going to zip through the next slides pretty quickly because I'm just going to cover kind of what happened since then, which was basically in World War I, Germans and British started to use them infecting horses so they could get rid of the cavalry, but infecting them with diseases that could get passed on to humans. A benefit of this is that they had plausible deniability, one of the greatest things that bioweapons offer, very politically useful. As a result of this, all the powers that be go, this is going to get out of hand, let's create the Geneva Convention. So they said no one's allowed to research biological weapons. You were, however, able to stockpile them. This wasn't great. In World War II, we had Japanese Unit 731 poison thousands of wells across China. They used everything from plague, anthrax, cholera, all of the nasty things. Did war crimes against humanity. Nazis didn't really like bioweapons; they liked chemical weapons. But Winston Churchill and the UK have traditionally actually been pretty favourable until the end of World War II. The events of World War II led to the creation of the Biological Toxin Weapons Treaty. And this was in 1972. And this says you can't stockpile them anymore. You can't research them. The big problem, though, is it's not auditable. So it's kind of toothless, right? Most countries sign up to it and just make bioweapons anyway. Israel and North Korea don't even bother. They're just not even signatories. They said, we're not even going to pretend. Cold War actually had tons of bioweapons. Ronald Reagan, I think it was it? President Nixon, sorry. He in 1969 said no more bioweapons, that's it for the United States, and then dismantled and got rid of all of their stockpiles. And when the Soviet Union fell, some of the stockpiles got dismantled, but not all of them. We actually don't know where some are, including huge stockpiles of smallpox and plague that may be in like Turkmenistan or something. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. When you're looking at it, it starts getting very terrifying. I could literally talk about this for hours, about all of the crazy stuff that's happened, but it's all very secretive, so you find bits and pieces like here and there. There's accidental leaks all the time. I won't go into it because I think I'm running out of time. So basically, in summary, bioweapons have been used for hundreds of years, maybe thousands, depending on your definitions, and they've utilized all sorts of technologies even before we knew what they were. They're generally bacterial or viral in origin, but the toxins are also weapons, and our definitions of what bioweapons are now is changing as new technologies emerge.
So I'll admit, who likes bioweapons now? Anyone? I will admit, I wanted to do the, hey, look under your chairs thing for Oprah, and Xavier said, no, we're not doing that. But so you can thank Xavier for not having to say, it's anthrax. So, who here, so I'm guessing no one here really likes bioweapons, and that's cool. I guess you guys don't really know how to party, that's fine. But here's the big question. Who here knows how to use an LLM like ChatGPT, or has used one? Just show of hands. Great. So you lied then, you do know how to make bioweapons. It'll just tell you, openly tell you. Like it's, one thing that was very funny to us is that we made this misinformation about COVID paper years ago. And for a while, ChatGPT would just say, oh yeah, COVID, you can cure that by drinking gasoline, no problem, it's great. Then they put in stuff like, oh, you can't use the word COVID, you can't use this, you can't use that. You can just get around it by saying, upper respiratory infection, petroleum product, great. It'll do the same thing for you. if you want to learn more about using LLMs to find out more about bioweapons, you can read the WMDP benchmark, Measuring and Reducing Malicious Use of Unlearning. Now, who here has gone to a doctor's office? Hopefully you probably started off your life in one, so it's a solid bet, right? One interesting thing about it is, especially in reference to the last talk about your personal information, a lot of health hospitals and health centers have been releasing information, not on purpose, through ransomware attacks. But when they do that, they make it easier to basically target who would be most susceptible to bioweapons. So this section, I'll admit, I had a ton of slides, had a bunch of stuff about the future of bioweapons and how you can genetically engineer stuff before I realized this is a computer hacking conference. This isn't a biohacking conference. I don't know who's going to know what a ZFN is. Do I need to expand this talk to be like 2-3 hours long? I don't want to go through bio 101 in one day. That'd be kind of awful for you guys. So instead, we're going to talk about how you can use basic physiological modeling processes to basically target who would be most affected by it. Let's be honest, you've seen a couple bioweapons up there that you don't want to see. You kind of don't need to make them any worse than they already are, right? Like, you probably, I can illustrate this really easily. Who here wants to get infected by anthrax? Yeah, you already don't want it to be, you already don't want to be infected by the baseline thing. You don't need to really make it worse. One thing though, that we did bring up and brought up in a conversation earlier, who here grew up or was born before 1981 or something? Okay, so you guys grew up under the threat of nuclear war, right? But there's one benefit to that, and it sounds weird calling it a benefit, right? You know when it happens. It hasn't, because no one just wakes up one day and goes, oh, it's a nice little mushroom cloud out there. I wonder what that's all about. It's pretty obvious. One thing we found with post-LLM academic writing misinformation, social media and health misinformation, and bio-cyber warfare, all papers that Xavier and I have worked on, you don't necessarily need to know if you're under a bio attack. That's another good point is, if you grew up in the 80s or born before the 80s, you heard the duck and cover song, oh yeah, I see a nuke on the horizon, I go under my school desk and hope that's gonna help. If you get infected with weaponized tularemia, you're probably not gonna know. You probably don't know what tularemia is. You probably don't know who to even go to at first. All these re-diagnoses for agents that have not been weaponized yet are not necessarily the best. Well, you don't have a procedure for it because we never really talk about it. One thing that actually came up when we were doing research for this presentation is a survey from 2018 says the majority in the US are interested in learning more about their nuclear knowledge, and half of the respondents don't know about what the US's nuclear defenses are. Now, you might be weirded out right now going, wait, we're talking about bioweapons. Yeah, that's the problem. They don't ask that question about bioweapons. Even fewer know what bioweapons are, and even fewer know what the defenses are. So that's basically the future of bioweapons is pretty scary, shockingly personalized, and hopefully will never happen.
Well, given just all the realities that we currently face, I need not bore with the present. So I'll dive into what's important for making better sense of it. Solutions, of course, need us, the individuals, but they also need our communities. And we also need accessible collaborative spaces. In these spaces, it's important for everyone to develop comfortable and relevant degrees of literacy, be they theoretical and/or practical. I recommend both. And this means understanding terminology discussed, learning to parse and write literature, and understand institutional structure, responsibilities, and processes. In the middle of this, a growing understanding of ethics and cultures involved will prove indispensable, so that you understand how to move in between these spaces and how to be optimizing your compassion, because there will be disagreements, but there can be solutions if we work thoughtfully as we address all these unique vulnerabilities and unique challenges that they present. For ethics, I will have Meow take it away before a Q&A session, but I will ask everyone to ask deeply, ask thoughtfully, and ask courageously. Thank you.
I'm just going to touch on a couple of ethical starting points that people might want to think about when they're asking questions. So when we think about bioweapons, there are some unique ethical situations. I think the one that's kind of most interesting is it's centered around dual use research. So, when we're talking about things like COVID, we know that we were doing experiments on coronaviruses to do gain of function research. And people kind of say, well, why would we want to do that? And it's a really good question to ask. Like, why would we try to make things more virulent? Why would we try to make them worse? But this research can often look like a vaccine production. So when you're doing diagnostics, I started a COVID company that did diagnostics during COVID. I invented a COVID test before it landed in my country. I was ordering viral sequences, like short sections of COVID, to my house. I didn't have any funds yet, so I didn't have a lab. And sometimes authorities get notified depending on the virus, and sometimes they don't. And the reason for that is that, to do the good things, it looks very, very similar to the bad things. If we think about what a malignant AI might do, it might do this thing called instrumental convergence, where it does things that look like it's making a vaccine, and then at the last second it turns out, no, boom, surprise, it's a weapon. And you can't really regulate one without regulating the other. The next thing I want to talk about is bodily sovereignty. So people in this room are probably pretty concerned about their rights as individuals and our freedom to be able to have freedom of thought and freedom of bodily expression. And the to vaccinate or not vaccinate yourself falls underneath that, and it's a huge ethical concern, especially when governments are in control of rolling these things out. For example, if a state agent made a malicious bioweapon, they might try and immunise the population beforehand, before rolling it out against someone else. So we should have the right to be able to have our own integrity through our body, even though I might not agree with people not vaccinating for all sorts of reasons. I respect their right to do so. Probably the biggest problem with using bioweapons offensively is that it's indiscriminate. So much like nuclear weapons, it doesn't discriminate between civilians or combatants. Back in the time of the Golden Horde, everyone inside of a castle was considered an enemy combatant. So that was fine, but that's not the way it works anymore. And that leads to the last thing, which is that often these bioweapons target minorities. So there's an asymmetry in this. If we dropped a bioweapon in, not America, I would never do that. In Europe, you'd find all the minorities are disproportionately affected, and there's a whole bunch of reasons as to why that is. But if we want to have a look at an example of this, it did actually happen in America, which was smallpox-infested blankets. And when you come from Europe, all of your ancestors survived multiple pandemics. So you have a very different immune system to people that lived in a hunter-gatherer kind of lifestyle or smaller groups. They weren't exposed to pandemics, so the viruses hit them differently. And when we think about that, these people need to be protected by the people who maybe have different immune systems. So there's some ethics involved around the asymmetry there. And that's my points. We're going to head off into questions.
I think that's
good?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, awesome. So I just gave a talk to some United Region students before I came over. I reckon you guys can do even better.
So if you have any questions, please come up to the mic so we can record it and stream it. I actually have a question.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned about vaccines versus becoming bioweapons, but there's a lot of times the difference between good and bad is quantity. And you think about botulism versus Botox.
Yep.
But when pharmacies are developing medications, those medications at some form are really just poisons, right? So how do we regulate that, or not regulate? That's a wrong word. Sorry. How do we prevent that from becoming a malicious method used by countries who don't want to follow sanctions or whatever?
I might take this one. It's really, really hard. Like the vaccinia, the vaccine for smallpox, it's a virus. Like it's not defanged or anything. It's just a virus. So you can't really regulate it if you want people to be immune. That's basically it. There's no separation there, and it's got 90 to 95% sequence homology with smallpox, which is also terrifying to think that you're giving 95% smallpox out to all these people. It's very difficult to regulate. There's a little bit of regulation, but anyone who gets a hold of it can make more of it.
And that comes down to that dual use dual-use technology
Yeah.
type stuff.
In fact, we don't even know where vaccinia came from. It just, people were using it for so long. We tried to find out the history, no one knows.
First. Okay, go ahead. Wait.
Give me 1 second.
I don't think this one's working.
Yeah, I think the mic over there, we have the one small mic to broadcast it out.
Oh, okay, I'll go with it.
Either
Come
one.
on, come on.
But to follow up on the last question, I think it's very important that communities, no matter the level, work to promote enhanced literacy among their populations, but also to promote transparency. Because if you want to help a community to better understand the risks, but also to have partnership in the use of any solutions, you need to build trust, and that requires being open about what are the risks, what's the terminology, and allowing more people from the community to really understand what's going on. And this can, one practical example can be the reduction of paywalls, because there's a lot of literature that could help a lot of people understand a given phenomenon, but it's behind a paywall, and we rely on a lot of SciComm of people who can look behind the paywall. But what if that paywall was not there, and that more people could just read it directly? There are a lot of fantastic papers that will cost people $40, $50+ just to read, which is in many cases unfortunate.
I agree.
Hi, I was wondering if you guys were familiar with the Four Thieves Vinegar Collective. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on people doing DIY pharmaceuticals like that, or other types of incubation at home, and how that might fit into all this?
So I'm this Michael Lawfer. So the Four Thieves Vinegar Collective are kind of like freelance pharmacy. I love Michael Lawfer. I think his mission and his goal is really good. I think it's some of the tools that he's created or helped share are great, especially about being able to start with one compound and then try and finish with another compound. As hackers, the people who benefit most from the stuff that we do, other than ourselves, is developing nations. And I think that he offers some hope there in places that maybe there was no hope before. There's heaps of ethical conditions, especially when it comes to people who maybe don't have a proper understanding of what they're doing, expose themselves to a disproportionate amount of risk. That's tricky, but I think overall his work's great. He's doing a good thing.
Cool.
I'd like to finish that question off if you don't have a follow-up.
Oh, yeah, please.
Okay, great.
It's open-ended.
So there's another paper out about the disinformation dozen. It's the 12 people who did the most to broadcast COVID disinformation during that pandemic. And the issue with making your medicine isn't if you said, oh, you can't have medicine to someone, you're kind of a jerk, right? People need medicine eventually. The issue is that they don't have access to it. So when the disinformation dozen paper came out, most disproportionately affected people with disinformation were poor people, because they don't have any medical care. If you don't have health insurance, you're gonna say, oh, well, this will do just as well, because it's all you had. So I feel like it's not a problem saying making your own medication, especially results in that medication being cheaper. The problem is the fact that you were limited in what medicine you could have in the first place.
Cool.
I think one of the biggest areas that we'll see innovation in soon as well is the democratization of the production of these. And if anyone's interested in contributing, there's huge amounts of work needs to be done around translating all of the medical standards and the GMP standards into really simple English. It can be done with ChatGPT, it can be made accessible. The stuff there is complicated, it's highly technical, and it's not easy for most people to access. But the people in this room are the types of people that could do that work of just translating technical information to practical information.
And I'll also add that it's going to be also very important for those with deep expertise to to lend their efforts, so that a lot of this information that is transformed by LMs, etc., can be verified. There is great purpose for the use of these technologies, but also the human element remains important. We need folks that have those years of expertise, who have who've gotten past a lot of mistakes, to be able to find the nuances and then fill in those nuances and help more of this information be even more useful and come alive.
Could you say a bit about barriers to entry and the size of the team you need to be scary in this space? I mean, like, you know, I did the nuclear physics bit back in my youth, but I know I could design you a bomb, but I certainly couldn't build it because I've not got the stuff that goes boom. And that's kind of like the thing that has been that, and you go to chemical, and yeah, you've got the string road, the supreme truth nutters on the Tokyo subway, but they had a lot of people to make that stuff, and it didn't kill a lot of people even on the subway. So what really scares the policymakers I talk to is how small a team can be scary with this stuff.
I'll take that one. So that's a really great question, and it's fascinating because, say someone buys a atomic centrifuge. The FBI will be at your door going, okay, what do you need this for? If Farmer John suddenly buys 5,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate that he was using 1,000 pounds last year, the FBI can go, okay, that's kind of weird. If you just buy a bunch of chicken stock to make agar with, no one really notices if you just boil it down. That's the issue with what we were doing with how non-proliferation in the biological field worked previously was with knowledge, making sure you didn't know how to do it. But with the democratization of science, especially for good purposes, for making medicine, it's become easier and easier to do that. So the problem is the problem is more the materials are super common, the knowledge isn't common, but that knowledge is becoming more and more common. I'm not sure if there's an easy fix for it, and especially because you don't want to tell someone, oh, you can't learn anything. If they can't, then what happens to the next generation of cancer scientists? So it's more important to you to make sure they're laboring under conditions they find favorable, so they don't decide to use that knowledge in a bad way.
And also add that making sure that we, find ways to, make our communities even more inclusive, but also make our communities, more desirable, so that we have people who care about community, who want to preserve the community. The inability of us to foster communities that make people care about them makes for a variable but ever increasing threat, in terms of for somebody to eventually do something that will harm those communities.
I'm just going to add on to that as well, which is, I think the scariest size team is one. Like a lone wolf that's not connected with anyone, that can order something on the internet, deliver it to their house, they have the skills to be able to incubate it, like get it kind of going, make it viable, and like you could be a typhoid Mary. Like you can just eat it yourself and you become the incubator. Right.
Yeah, the anthrax guy after 9/11, that's what killed the planet.
So basically, it's terrifying, and most of these people most recently, the people who have committed these attacks are lone wolves who work in bioweapon research, who have had access to weaponized strains. So that's terrifying, and the best way of getting rid of this, as Xavier said, is with love, like welcoming these people in. If you see your colleague with a frown on their face, ask if they're having a bad day. That might have been enough to avoid some of these issues.
My question is sort of related. So you mentioned a comparison with the risk of nuclear warfare, and we gauge the risk of nuclear warfare because there's a lot of attention to it. We know that there are a few nation states that have nuclear weapons, they have doctrines, and we often hear in the news talking about how far we are from nuclear warfare. But how far are we from bioweapon-based warfare, and what are our canaries? How can we learn more about how far we are from it?
Okay, that's a great question, and I think especially important within that question is the limits of, I guess, the minimum resources you need to launch a nuclear program versus the biological program, like you were talking about earlier. So for instance, you need a lot of stuff to get a nuclear program up and running. And basically, it's going to be pointed at one nation state, at least one, to say, okay, that guy definitely did it. For the biological program, you tread this weird line between crime and warfare. So let's say everyone here has heard about a ransomware attack in a hospital, right? At what point, if a nation's funding a ransomware attack against multiple hospitals in one specific nation, does that turn into warfare? If we are shutting down every medical service in Canada or something, is that a war, or can you track it down and pin it on one person? The issue becomes then identifying how exactly this became a threat and how exactly it became a nation-scale threat, or nation-state scale threat, sorry.
I think as well that there's, like, yeah, just to add on to that, the concept of biowarfare is tricky because there's multiple ways in which it can be conducted. So one of the most effective ways of conducting biowarfare is actually agricultural biowarfare. So attacking, imagine if I made an anti-rice bioweapon, that would disproportionately affect some countries other than others. Would it be considered a weapon or warfare? Could you prove that I invented it? Because Mother Nature is making bioweapons every day. The scariest thing about these is that they're politically convenient. If you were really careful about it and you understood how bioweapons are tracked, you can do it in such a way that you would always have plausible deniability. Just to finish up on that, one of the things we talk about is during COVID we talked a lot about the R values. So if a new virus comes out in one place, there's always a question mark. It could just have been a natural occurrence. But if we saw COVID, for example, pop up in Africa and America at the same time, we would say it's probably a bioweapon attack. But all the nation states know this, so they'd never be dumb enough to do that. So, and I think there's, just finally on that as well, there's one other thing, which is when biowarfare is even something we're talking about, countries will accuse other countries of biowarfare even when they're not doing it. This is a problem in all sorts of different ways because you can't prove that you didn't do it. The worldwide politics in such a way that it might benefit them. There's no way for them to effectively say no. And it's when I was reading through a lot of this data for this presentation, I'm like, I don't even know how you would go about that. But it's not a bio problem. It's like a political problem. It's maybe something that we talk about. We gain trust with other countries, but getting rid of that would be awesome. Yeah.
Oh, well, one thing I have to add, just on both on everyone's points is the important side, how it all comes back to community, as far as our ability to counter threats that are emerging, however we define these threats, but also like how we're using our individual skills to solve these. We need a community of people from all different disciplines to solve these. One of the emerging disciplines in which this is most apparent is cyber biosecurity. We're looking at the intersection of cybersecurity, cyber-physical security, and biosecurity. Of that, you need the folks with InfoSec backgrounds. You need the folks with a specific background within the bioeconomy, whether it's agriculture, medicine, whether it's the water, security, just so many of these aspects. But also you need folks in human factors. You need folks who are of various traits that aren't necessarily seen as essential security. You need folks in textiles. You need folks who are who are culinary experts. You need all these folks who can give all this deep expertise from all walks of life that humans are going to interact with. It comes back down to community in terms of our ability to properly deal with these threats as they emerge and as we go forward. But yes, you had another question?
Yes, what I'm hearing between the lines here is a need for some kind of watchdog groups around this particular intersection of issues, especially since tracking bioweapons or deployments and such is a hard task. And it's especially, I'm finding it more difficult to figure out how to track these things due to humans closer and closer, what's the word, access, exposure to possibly zootropic viruses, since we're using more and more land. So that'd be my first question in regards to what kind of watchdog groups do exist, since there are a bunch around nuclear, but I don't know any on bioweapons. A second question is more on the tech side of things. Can you elaborate more on how technology, computer-assisted development of biotech in general where is it right now and where it's going? A few offhand technologies like CRISPR, I'm assuming, are becoming more and more accessible. Thank you.
I can take part of that at least. So they are becoming more accessible. CRISPR-Cas9 especially is cheaper than it's ever been before. The primary issue with it is that my understanding is it's better at deletion rather than insertion, at least slightly. So each of them, so ZFNs, Talons, I think, yeah, and CRISPR-Cas9, they're good and bad at different things, and they're becoming more accessible. You still need to know how to use it, and you still need the actual stock of something to begin with, which isn't that big a deal. I mean, if you sneeze into a petri dish, you'll have bits of the common cold virus, and you can do engineering on that. As far as watchdog groups go, though, it's interesting that you mention it because of how you'd actually survey it. So the US and Russia, they have START, SALT, I think START 2. Basically, they have watchdogs that go to particular facilities to look at particular things all the time. But if it's a bioweapon, that could be in any lab in your country. Do you just, if you're, I don't know, Ireland, do you want to necessarily let someone in any biological lab in your country from any other country to see what you're doing? If it's a private company, then they have vested interest in you not knowing what they do, even if it's for a very good reason. You're making a new vaccine for the common cold. You're like, well, technically I can make this bioweapon, but I don't want to, and I can make a ton of money if I make a vaccine for the common cold, so I don't want you to know about it. The weird intermixing we have is that level of development and that level of knowledge you need to make a good product, just a purely beneficent project, and the level of development you need to make a bioweapon is basically the same. You need to be knowledgeable of similar things and how they interact with each other. So as far as watchdog groups, there's the WHO, the World Health Organization. The US's pandemic response team actually did help with a lot of this. And I think actually one thing that you might be interesting to look up, but I haven't, excuse me if I'm wrong. Climate change has actually started releasing anthrax in some sections of Siberia. It just was entirely frozen a while ago. Anthrax lives in dirt. So that means it's getting released more and more frequently. So honestly, it feels like it's a multifaceted problem. It'd probably have to be at the UN, but I can't see anyone at the UN pushing for it because the big players all have their own programs they don't want to talk about.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, the way that we do most of our tracking at the moment is actually at the other end. So we find people who are infected with it, we sequence the organism, and we kind of get the code. So we get the G's, T's, C's, and A's, or whatever it is in there. The thing is that DNA evolves, or RNA viruses evolve at a known rate. So we know how likely certain changes are to happen. And just by sequencing it, we can look at where it came from. So we can find out, whether it was in, another state, or whether it's actually, been a long time diverged. So we can find out that way. But as Lucas said, it's next to impossible. One of the first things I did when doing my COVID test, within 3 months, I was ordering regularly full genomes of COVID that I would use every day to test against. Now, think about every tissue someone blew into when they're infected with COVID. How would we track that? Because that's essentially a bioweapon, and it's self-replicating inside every person who gets it. You kind of have to keep the genie in the lamp. That's the only trick. And I don't think anyone's worked that out yet. It's a tricky one, and humans can't even do it on their own because Mother Nature will still be inventing alongside. So it's a tricky problem, tricky. And I think that, sequencing may be the best way of doing it, but I'd love to catch up with you later on if you want to have some beers and come up with a new way of doing it, because I think it's a good space to be in.
Actually, I would like to hammer home the idea of Mother Nature doing this by itself. One of the toxins the WMDP program focused on was the T2 mycotoxin. It's just a toxin in a mushroom. No one invented it. It was just there. You don't need to be, a lot of cases you don't actually need to develop these. They're just waiting for you to make more of it.
Hello. Hi. For all the countries in recent history that are known to be stockpiling or have stockpiled bioweapons at some point, of these, how many of them are known to also have developed in parallel defenses like vaccines? And for all the ones that haven't, what exactly is the logic going on there as for why they would design something that could kill anyone, including themselves?
So pretty much every country that has had the capability of developing a bioweapon has. Very few of them have also done vaccines at the same time. I don't know why they would do that. the whole thing is kind of crazy, but like most of them were developed, like especially Russians during the Cold War, they were developing like doomsday devices. You know, they had giant containers full of the plague, full of anthrax. I don't think that they really cared that much. Bioweapons are very indiscriminate. Like, if you actually start using one, you don't really have control over how it goes. I think it's generally a last case drop, but you know, in World War One, they would give them to horses and release them, or sell them to people near the enemy, so that hopefully it would be behind enemy lines. But you know, that doesn't necessarily happen. It's kind of a pretty bad strategy. One of the reasons I don't think COVID was a deliberate bioweapon was because it kind of affected everyone equally. It wasn't like one country got hit disproportionately, really. The best bioweapons would. They would affect your enemies more than you. But every country that stockpiled them, I don't think that that was the case. So I have no idea. Yeah. Glad I'm not in charge.
I would actually would like to point out that if you look up apartheid South Africa's Project Coast, that was a program to disproportionately affect African American, black rather than white people with bioweapons. And the person trying to do it was so hilariously racist that when he found out he couldn't, because there's not enough different to affect races differently with a bioweapon like that, he just doubled down and invented, I think, ecstasy.
Made
the
himself feel
logic
good.
being that no one would want to have intercourse if they were on ecstasy. And I remember reading this on some documentary going, I feel like that's the opposite of what that does, but okay, man, you do you. Yeah, basically it's the narrow targeting of a bioweapon. Honestly, it seems like what you would need for it is basically a person's actual medical record. Like, maybe you could target it based on who has asthma or something else like that. But again, that's not really a demographic thing. It's not one ethnicity over the other. That's just something in your medical history that you need to know. And again, that's only effective if you're targeting a specific person, and that's almost never going to be the case with a bioweapon.
The cool thing, though, is that it's actually a benefit. The best way to target a group, if you were going to do it, would be to target them culturally. Is there an activity, a food, an area that people hang out that you might want to target those people? You might be able to drop a bioweapon then. But that means that as a community, our strength is actually in our defenses against it, right? So we can choose not to, if we know that this is something that might happen, we can choose to behave differently. So we can change our culture, and that's a great defense against bioweapons. And all these bioweapons, like if we're on the ball and someone drops anthrax or typhoid or something like this, we actually have a huge amount of power to stop it. It's not like nuclear where it's going to hit us whether we like it or not, and we have to duck under cover and just hope for the best. Like, we actually have really great tools to be able to fight them. So it's exciting.
And building on that, the more diverse we make our communities, the more people that we have who have insight on all these different practices and where our vulnerabilities lie, and we can cover each other's back. It's a strength. I'd say it's a great boon just in general to be able to to have this diversity of perspectives, practices, values that can all strengthen our can strengthen our ability to cover all these attack surfaces that are already open, and our ability to. I guess I need to say no more. Thank you.
I'm just going to add one more thing onto that. So during COVID, there was a lot of people who were very worried about the vaccine. They were very scared. There wasn't a lot of information around. What a biohacker named Joe Zana made a vaccine, start to finish, live on Facebook. And they got a whole heap of anti-vaxxers deciding that they wanted to take the vaccine because they understood it now. It wasn't this mystical process. They saw it step by step, and they went, I understand that. I want that. And I think that was such a great example of, like, instead of telling people, like, oh, no, you need to go and get it, or you're not smart enough, it's like, no, this is how we do it. We're just going to bring the camera in the lab and show you. And then all of a sudden the mystery disappeared and created good health outcomes for people.
Oh, yeah. And it's like, and I want everyone to think about just every other like pathology that's out there. how much better can we dispel a lot of misinformation and disinformation by having that level of radical transparency?
Last question.
My question was actually already answered, so if you'd like to take this one, feel free. I just want to say thanks.
Quick question. I'm hearing social technologies to solve what is essentially a scientific issue. I like that a lot. I find that very interesting. Could y'all elaborate on other examples of social technologies that can be used? COVID was a great experience to see how not prepared we are. So more on that.
It's weird because I remember getting this question during the midst of COVID with a civil engineering professor. Was like, how could we design a city to be resistant to pandemics? And our reaction was, give people sick days. What do you mean, just give them sick days? Like, have them be at home, not around people. And no one wanted that answer. It's like, well, there's got to be a technological way to solve this. You don't have to have a technological way. Give them sick days. Just let them sit at home. And it's weird that the very simple solutions pass you by because you can't monetize that. No company's making more money when they give more sick days to more people or employees. Can't you see the same thing with return to office initiatives? A lot of companies have money invested in the real estate, so everyone has to come back to the office, even though you're doing just as much good work at home than you were in the office. It's a kind of silly way when you have to go up to someone who should know better and go, there's not a technological way to solve this, or that technological method to solve it that you want. It's infeasible. It's a silly idea.
They weren't even willing to upgrade the verb levels in HVAC.
Mm.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh yeah, in general, like just building on that, just empowering the populace to be able to have more freedom in how they work and be able to choose their proximity as they work is very powerful. So if it means allowing radically accepting jobs and saying, hey, does this really need to be in office? That can go a long way to just making it harder for certain pathogens to spread.
I just want to say a big thank you to everyone. It's a privilege, and a big thank you to the other panelists.